It was supposed to be the perfect weekend getaway. A young couple, David and Rachel, had booked a highly rated Airbnb in Florida. Modern, sleek, spotless. The photos looked straight out of a magazine, and with dozens of glowing reviews, they felt completely safe. When they first walked in, everything seemed perfect. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, the furniture was new, and soft jazz played on the little Bluetooth speaker the host had left for them. It felt welcoming. Almost too welcoming. The first night passed without incident. They cooked dinner, shared a bottle of wine, and laughed at how grown up they felt having an entire apartment to themselves. Before bed, David even said, "This place is so nice, I don't know why it was so cheap." Rachel brushed it off, telling him they'd just gotten lucky. But the second night, things changed. David was adjusting the TV when he noticed something strange. A faint red light blinked from a bookshelf across the room. At first he thought it was just some kind of router or charging device, but as he leaned closer, his stomach dropped. It wasn't a router. It wasn't a charger. It was a camera lens tucked into what looked like a fake smoke detector. His voice shook as he called for Rachel. When she saw it, she froze, her face drained of color. They both began tearing through the apartment, hearts pounding, palms sweating, and what they found only made things worse. Another camera in the living room, one in the kitchen, and the worst of them all, a tiny one hidden in the bedroom, pointing directly at the bed. Rachel couldn't stop shaking. The thought that their private moments, their laughter, even their sleep, had all been recorded, made her feel violated in a way words couldn't explain. David immediately contacted Airbnb and the local police. An officer arrived within the hour, his flashlight sweeping across the small devices. He shook his head, muttering, "You'd be surprised how often we get calls like this." But when the host was questioned, he denied everything. He insisted he had no idea how the cameras got there, suggesting maybe a previous guest installed them. His tone was cold, almost smug. For David and Rachel, it didn't matter. They packed their bags and left that night, unable to sleep another second in that apartment. And even though they were gone, the damage was done. The fear followed them home. Weeks later, Rachel would still jolt awake at night, convinced there was a camera hidden somewhere in their own bedroom. David covered every smoke detector with tape. They stopped staying at Airbnbs altogether, because sometimes the scariest thing isn't a ghost lurking in the dark. It's a stranger, silently watching, recording every move you make. Claire had been dreaming of a quiet writing retreat for years. She wanted silence, solitude, and maybe a little inspiration from the woods. So when she found a rustic cabin on Airbnb in the heart of Oregon, it felt like fate. The listing promised peace, privacy, and creative inspiration. The photos showed warm wooden walls, a fireplace, and tall trees right outside the window. It was exactly what she needed. The first day, she settled in. She made tea, lit a candle, and sat by the window with her notebook. The cabin smelled of pine and old wood, comforting, familiar. For a while she felt safe, but there was one detail she couldn't ignore. At the end of the hallway was a door, a small, narrow attic door, locked with an old brass latch. When she asked the host about it, he laughed softly over the phone. "Oh, that, just storage, don't worry about it." His tone was casual, but something about it felt off. On the second night, as Claire lay in bed, the cabin's silence was broken by a faint sound above her. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. One step, then another, then another. Her heart began to pound. She reminded herself, old houses creak, wood expands. It's nothing. But the sound wasn't random. It was steady, pacing, back and forth. Someone was walking directly above her, in the attic. She called the host again, her voice trembling. He chuckled nervously, insisting, "There's no one there. It's probably raccoons or the wind, the attic is empty." But deep down, she didn't believe him. That night, she left the hallway light on. Every time the cabin grew too quiet, she strained her ears. terrified of hearing it again. And then, at nearly 3 a.m., it happened. The doorknob to the attic rattled violently. Not just once, not like the wind. It twisted and shook as though someone on the other side was desperately trying to force it open. Claire's throat went dry. She couldn't breathe. Frozen, she stared at the door, whispering to herself, "No one's there. No one's there." And then she heard it, a low, muffled voice from behind the door, a whisper that sent ice through her veins. "Let me out." That was enough. She grabbed her bag, her keys, her notebook, and fled into the night. She didn't even bother to check out. She drove until sunrise, until she found a gas station filled with people, where she finally felt safe enough to stop. When she reported it to Airbnb, the host repeated the same story. The attic was just for storage. He brushed off her fears, almost mocking her in his replies. But Claire knows what she heard. She knows the difference between a raccoon and footsteps, between the wind and a whisper. And when she writes late at night now, she can still hear that same phrase echoing in her memory. "Let me out." Daniel had always loved visiting New York City. The noise, the lights, the restless energy. It made him feel alive. But this trip was different. He was traveling alone, and instead of a pricey hotel, he decided to book a small Airbnb. The listing was simple, a one-bedroom apartment tucked away on the second floor of an old brick building in Queens. The photos made it look cozy, and the reviews all said the same thing: safe, clean, private. It was exactly what Daniel wanted. When he checked in late that night, the apartment was quiet, too quiet. The air smelled faintly of mildew, and the radiator hissed like it was struggling to breathe. But Daniel shrugged it off. He was tired. He unpacked a little, brushed his teeth, and collapsed into bed. Sleep came easily, at first. Around 2 a.m. he woke suddenly. His mouth was dry, his body stiff. He thought maybe the radiator had popped again. But then, he noticed something. The bedroom door was open. He was almost sure he had shut it. And in the doorway, someone was standing there. Daniel's stomach dropped. His first thought was that a burglar had broken in. But when his eyes adjusted to the darkness, his breath caught in his throat. The figure looked exactly like him. Same face, same hair, same clothes, even the same way of standing, with one shoulder slightly slouched. It was like looking into a mirror, but there was no mirror. For a moment they just stared at each other. Daniel couldn't move. His chest felt heavy, like the air had been sucked out of the room. The figure tilted its head, just slightly, and Daniel realized, with growing dread, that its movements didn't match his own. He blinked, and it was gone. The doorway was empty. The apartment was silent. Daniel told himself he had been dreaming, that maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on him. He forced himself to sleep again, though his body shook with every creak of the old building. The next morning, sunlight poured in, making everything feel almost normal again. But when he went into the bathroom, he froze. The mirror above the sink, it had a long, jagged crack running down the center. Daniel swore he hadn't noticed it the night before. He leaned closer, and for a split second, he thought he saw something. A face, his face. But the expression staring back wasn't his own. It was twisted, angry, almost sneering. Heart pounding, he backed away. He couldn't stand to look at it any longer. When he messaged the host, asking about the mirror, the reply came quickly. "That mirror's been cracked for years, don't worry about it." But Daniel couldn't stay another night. He grabbed his bag, booked the first hotel he could find, and left the keys on the kitchen counter. Even now, months later, when he looks into the mirror at home, sometimes he hesitates, because in the back of his mind he's haunted by one thought. What if his reflection doesn't move the way it's supposed to? Jenna and her best friend Melissa had been planning their Los Angeles trip for months. They wanted something cheap but close enough to the city to explore. so when they found a small Airbnb apartment with glowing reviews, it felt like a steal. The pictures looked fine. A little plain, a little outdated, but nothing unusual. The host seemed friendly in the messages, reassuring them that the place was quiet and safe. When they first arrived, the apartment smelled faintly of bleach. Jenna assumed it was a good thing. It meant the place was clean. They laughed, dropped their bags, and ordered takeout. For a while, everything felt normal. But later that night, when it was time to sleep, Melissa pulled back the covers and froze. On the sheets right in the center of the bed were dark rust-colored stains. At first, Jenna tried to calm her down, saying it was probably wine, or maybe the host had spilled something. But deep down she knew. Those weren't wine stains, the edges were too dark, too old. Melissa looked sick. She wanted to leave immediately, but it was late, and they didn't know the area well. So, against their better judgment, they messaged the host. The host responded quickly, apologizing. He arrived 20 minutes later with a fresh set of sheets, smiling awkwardly as he said, Sorry. Careless mistake. Someone must have spilled wine." The girls wanted to believe him. They wanted to sleep, so they let it go. But at 3 a.m., Jenna woke suddenly. The room was quiet, except for a faint sound, a steady drip, drip, drip. Her stomach turned. She sat up, listening carefully. The sound wasn't coming from the bathroom. It wasn't the kitchen. It was coming from above them, from the vent over their bed. The smell hit her next, a heavy metallic stench that made her gag. It wasn't bleach anymore. It was iron, blood. She shook Melissa awake, her hands trembling. Together they dragged the bed across the room, away from the vent. But the dripping sound grew louder, echoing in the silence of the apartment. Neither of them slept the rest of the night. The next morning, Jenna opened the blinds and froze. Police cars lined the street. Officers moved in and out of the building. Neighbors stood outside, whispering. When she asked what happened, one of them quietly said, "Someone was attacked in that apartment last week." Her knees nearly buckled. The stains, the smell, the dripping. Jenna and Melissa packed their bags in silence and left without looking back. And for weeks afterward, Jenna would wake in the night, convinced she could still smell it, that metallic stench, the smell of iron, the smell of blood. Ethan and Laura had been saving up for their anniversary trip for months. They wanted something different, something unique. So instead of a hotel, they booked a Victorian-style Airbnb in London. The photos showed tall windows, antique furniture, and creaky wooden floors. It felt like stepping into history, and when they first arrived, they were both enchanted. The house had charm, a strange kind of beauty that made them feel like they'd walked into a different era. But there was one thing that immediately caught Laura's attention. At the end of the upstairs hallway stood a closet door. Unlike the others, this one was secured with a thick iron chain wrapped around the handles and padlocked shut. Laura frowned. "Why would a closet need to be locked like that?" she whispered. Ethan shrugged it off. "Probably storage. Maybe the owners don't want people touching their stuff." Still, every time Laura walked past it, she felt uneasy, as if someone or something was standing just behind it waiting. The first night was quiet. They made dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and laughed about how haunted the place felt. But sometime around 2 a.m., Laura stirred awake. She lay still, listening. And then she heard it. Scratching. Slow, deliberate scratching, coming from the locked closet down the hall. Her body froze. Her mind raced, trying to convince herself it was mice, or maybe the house settling. But deep down she knew better. This wasn't random, it was steady, like fingernails dragging across wood. The next morning she told Ethan, her voice shaky. He laughed nervously and promised it was nothing. But even he avoided looking at the closet when they walked past it. That night, the scratching came again. Louder, closer. And at exactly 4 a.m., the sound changed. The closet rattled violently. the padlock clanging against the door as though someone inside was trying to force it open. Ethan shot upright in bed, his eyes wide, his chest pounding. And then, a whisper, faint, muffled, coming from behind the door. "Let me out!" Laura screamed. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the stairs. They didn't even bother grabbing their bags. They ran into the street barefoot, their hearts racing, too terrified to look back. Later, when they reported it to Airbnb, the host sent a short reply. "It's just for storage, nothing to worry about." No explanation, no apology, nothing. But Ethan and Laura knew what they heard. They could still hear it echoing in their minds. Long after they had left that house, that voice, that desperate plea, "Let me out." And the question that still haunts them both to this day, if they hadn't run, what would have come out of that closet? Samantha had always been a little cautious when traveling alone. She double-checked doors, read reviews carefully, and only booked Airbnbs that seemed safe. When she planned her trip to Miami, she picked a small, bright apartment that had dozens of glowing ratings. The host's profile picture showed a man in his late 40s with a friendly smile. His messages were polite, though a little too enthusiastic. "I'll be nearby if you need anything," he wrote. "I like to make sure my guests are comfortable." Samantha thought nothing of it. After all, he said he lived on the property. When she arrived, he greeted her at the door. His smile seemed warm enough, but there was something in his eyes she didn't like. A little too intense, a little too long when he looked at her. Still, the apartment was nice, clean, bright. She unpacked, showered, and tried to settle in. That night, she curled up in bed with her laptop, scrolling through emails when she heard the soft creak of her bedroom door. Her head snapped up. The door slowly inched open, and there he was, the host, standing in the shadows, his face half hidden. Samantha's heart pounded. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp, though her hands trembled. The host froze, then gave a nervous chuckle. "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just checking to see if you were comfortable." She forced him out, slamming the door behind him. Her skin crawled, but she tried to convince herself maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he was just too hands-on. The second night, it happened again. This time, Samantha woke in the dead of night. The air felt heavy, her chest tight. She turned her head and froze. He was sitting in the chair by her bed, silent, watching her sleep. For a moment, her body locked in terror. Her throat felt like it was closing. Then adrenaline surged, and she snapped upright. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice shaking with rage and fear. The host flinched, but his face twisted into something darker, like he was annoyed she'd caught him. He stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, and left the room without a word. Samantha didn't wait for a third night. She grabbed her suitcase, threw her things inside, and called a cab at 3 a.m. She didn't care about the cost. She needed to leave. She spent the rest of her trip in a crowded hotel, where the constant noise and thin walls were comforting instead of annoying. But even now, when Samantha tries to sleep in unfamiliar places, she finds herself jolting awake, convinced someone is sitting in the corner of the room just watching. The Parker family had always wanted to visit New Orleans. The history, the food, the music. It was a trip they'd been planning for years. When they finally booked a historic Airbnb just outside the French Quarter, it felt like the perfect choice. The listing was beautiful. High ceilings, old wooden floors, antique furniture, and walls painted with warm, fading colors. The host even mentioned in the description that the house was built in the 1800s and full of character. The family of four, Mark, his wife Emily, and their two kids, Lucy and Ben, settled in happily that first day. They explored the city, ate beignets, and returned to the house exhausted but content. That night, though, things began to change. Around midnight, Lucy padded into her parents' room, shivering. "Daddy, it's too cold," she whispered. Mark frowned. New Orleans in summer was humid, sticky, but when he walked her back to the bedroom, the air inside the children's room felt like an icebox. His breath came out in faint white clouds. The strange part, the heater wasn't even on. Mark turned it off completely just to be sure, but the temperature didn't change. Emily tried to laugh it off, saying old houses had drafts. Still, Lucy and Ben huddled together under heavy blankets, their little bodies trembling. The next night, it happened again, only worse. This time, Mark woke to Lucy crying. He rushed to her room, ready to comfort her, but froze at the doorway. In the corner of the room, crouched low, was a shadowy figure. It wasn't just the darkness, it had shape, shoulders, arms, a head tilted unnaturally low, almost touching its chest. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, it just crouched there, facing the children's bed. Mark's blood ran cold. He lunged forward, flipping on the lamp. The light filled the room, and the figure was gone. Just an empty corner. But Lucy was sobbing, pointing toward it. "Daddy, he was watching us." Mark didn't sleep the rest of the night. He sat in a chair outside the kids' room, every muscle tense, staring at the door until morning. The next day, when Emily brought it up to the host, the man laughed lightly. "Oh, that's just old house energy. You know, a child died in that room back in the 1800s. People say it gets cold sometimes." Emily's stomach dropped. Mark didn't say a word. That evening, they didn't even bother unpacking. They packed their bags, bundled the kids into the car, and left. They didn't care that it was midnight, or that they didn't have another place to stay yet. Even now, years later, Lucy still remembers it. She still wakes in the middle of the night, shivering, certain that someone is in the corner of her room. And Mark? He never books historic homes anymore, because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it's still watching. Maya was a college student traveling alone for the first time. She had a small budget, so instead of a hotel, she booked a cheap Airbnb apartment in Chicago. The listing looked simple but decent. A studio with a kitchenette, a small bathroom, and a single bed by the window. The host barely spoke to her over messages, but the reviews mentioned quiet place, no frills, which was enough for Maya. The first night passed without incident. She watched Netflix on her laptop, double-checked that the doors were locked, and went to sleep. For a girl traveling alone, she felt proud of how independent she was. But the next morning, when she woke up, she noticed something odd. Her backpack had been unzipped, her clothes were moved around, and the fridge door was wide open. Maya frowned. She knew she hadn't done that. She was careful, almost obsessive about her belongings. But she told herself she must have been more tired than she thought. That night she made sure. She zipped her bag, left her shoes neatly by the bed, and even set her water bottle in a very specific spot on the counter, just to see. When she woke, the bag was open again. Her shoes were scattered, and the water bottle gone. Her stomach dropped. Someone had been in the apartment while she slept. Terrified, Maya decided she would leave the next morning. She spent the day out in the city, trying to distract herself. But when she came back that evening, the door was still locked. Everything looked fine. She tried to convince herself she was imagining things. That night, around 2 a.m., she woke suddenly. The room was dark, and for a moment, she didn't know what had startled her. Then she heard it, breathing, slow, heavy, coming from inside the room. Her blood ran cold, her eyes darted around in the dark. And then she heard it, coming from the closet. Hands shaking, she reached for her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on the closet door. The breathing grew louder. Her throat tightened, every nerve in her body screamed to run, but she forced herself forward. With trembling hands, she yanked the closet door open, and there he was. A man. Curled up between her clothes, his wide eyes staring back at her. His face was pale, his hair matted, and his chest rose and fell with each ragged breath. For a split second they locked eyes, then he lunged, shoving past her and sprinting out the door before she could even scream. Shaking, Maya called the police. When they arrived, they confirmed her worst fear. The man wasn't just a trespasser, he had been living in the apartment, sneaking out during the day, coming back at night and hiding whenever she was inside. The fridge, the bag, the shoes, it was all him. The thought made her skin crawl. Maya moved out that same night and never stayed at an Airbnb alone again. Even now, years later, she still checks closets before she sleeps, because she knows what it feels like to have a stranger just a few feet away, watching, waiting, breathing in the dark. Sophie and Daniel had been saving up for months to take a trip to Spain. They weren't the type to splurge on luxury hotels, so when they found an Airbnb apartment in Seville with old-world charm and antique furniture, it felt like the perfect choice. The apartment was gorgeous, stone walls, tall wooden beams, and sunlight spilling through lace curtains. But the centerpiece of the bedroom was an enormous antique mirror, framed in heavy gold, standing floor to ceiling against the far wall. Daniel admired it immediately. "Looks like something out of a palace," he said with a grin. But Sophie felt uneasy. The mirror was beautiful, yes, but something about the way it seemed to swallow the room's light unsettled her. That first night, Sophie tossed and turned. She woke at nearly 2 a.m., her throat dry. Rolling over, her eyes landed on the mirror. She froze. In the reflection, she could see herself lying in bed. But something was wrong. Her reflection wasn't moving. While she sat upright in bed, her reflection just lay there, perfectly still, eyes open, staring straight at the ceiling with a blank, lifeless expression. Her heart raced. She blinked hard, rubbed her eyes. And when she looked again, the reflection had caught up. Now it was sitting, mirroring her every movement. Sophie tried to convince herself it was exhaustion, her mind playing tricks. She didn't wake Daniel. She just turned her back to the mirror and forced herself to sleep. The next night, Daniel woke to a different sound. Fingernails. Slow, deliberate fingernails scraping against glass. He sat up, pulse hammering, and realized it was coming from the mirror. He nudged Sophie awake, whispering, "Do you hear that?" Together they turned toward the reflection, and their stomachs dropped. Across the inside of the glass were deep, jagged scratch marks, fresh, as if someone had clawed at the mirror from the other side. The reflection of the room looked darker now, heavier, as if it belonged to some other place. And their reflections?